Good evening. I'm going to call to order the Regional Planning Commission for Wednesday, June 6th. We can start with roll call, please.
Frank Peterson. Here. James Fewens. Here. Diane Vanderwell.
Here.
James Barnes.
Here.
Sarah Chavilicek.
Here.
Larry Chesney.
Here.
Ed Hawkins.
Here.
Kevin Weisky.
Here.
And Peter Gower.
Here.
Terrific. Commissioner Peterson, can you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now if we can move along to approval of the agenda.
Commissioner Weisky, so moved.
Commissioner Hawkins, second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, we'll move along to approval of the minutes for the May 9th, 2018 Regional Planning Commission meeting. If there are no changes, I'll entertain a motion, please.
Move to approve the minutes. Commissioner Chesney.
Commissioner Gower, second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Next, we'll move along to public comment. Do we have any requests to speak?
You have two this evening. I have Danny Cleus, and after that will be Tammy Holtstill. We'll do Tammy Holtstill first, and then Danny Cleus.
Terrific, thank you.
Of course.
Dan Hill still, Lynn Valley Small Lake Recovery Committee, the water's still there, we're still here for the record. I'm before you right now speaking about, again, the fox guarding the hen house. You're looking at, regionals should be looking at every project, not just certain projects. And one of the things that I have noticed in my year of somewhat tender being in front of everyone, that statutes are not being followed in NRS 278 and by certain entities within the agency of the different cities. And those kinds of things are the things that when it comes before you guys, you need to see and pay attention to what the NRSs are. Make sure that the staff, before it goes to the previous planning commission, before it comes to you, that all the statutes had been met, that the safety of every single resident that is going to be affected has been looked at, not just pocketbooks for taxes. It needs to be everything. It needs to be police and fire and traffic and health and welfare. A good one is working with TUMWA, making sure that they're doing the right things. There's a lot that needs to be looked at before approval is just given. And development can't just develop for develop's sake. Once I've heard somebody say, if you're not growing, you're dying. Well, that's not true. Salt Lake City is a good example. They've grown some, but they have a confined area. They have a closed basin, and they've learned how to deal with not having flooding, not overgrowing and making a great runoff into the Salt Lake. And they've also taken care of the Salt Lake. Silver Lake, Whites Lake, and Swan Lake have not been taken care of properly. There's been development, there's stormwater runoff, there's effluent with the salts in it that are also causing so saturation cannot happen. These kind of things need to be looked at and taken care of before develop can go any further. So I'm asking you guys to please step up. Instead of being the fox guarding the hen house, be a true leader of the community and make Washoe County, City of Reno, and City of Sparks a place everybody wants to live and not hate like they hate California. Traffic is like California right now, and it's getting worse. It doesn't need to be. There's gotta be things in place that need to be done first before we go crazy and build humongous places. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Danny Cleus.
Danny Cleus for the record. Been in front of most of you for over a year now. Nothing's been done to Swan Lake yet, but yet building continues. Maybe it's time for regional to step up and say enough's enough. Maybe you should be telling the city of Reno, Washoe County, and everybody else, enough. There's a lot of development going on out there right now that's really not going on. They flattened out their land, but yet they're not building. The last rainstorm we had, plenty of runoff off of all those areas that aren't being built on. I know one that's supposed to have 700 and something apartment complexes has been sitting there for 3 months. No equipment's moved on that property. Regional needs to step up and do something. Our valleys are really unique out there. Like you heard Tammy say, Salt Lake City is the only other closed basin that has development around it. Our basins aren't made for that. They're a lot smaller, a lot less you can do. But yet, planners, city planners, Washoe County planners, think they can develop it just like anywhere else. You can't. You see what happens. It's been over a year. HESCO barriers are still there. Who's going to be next? Is it going to be Whites Lake? Is it going to be Silver Lake? Or is it all going to dump into us again and be us all over again? Something needs to be done with the building, guys. And it's time for regional to step up and say no. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I need to open public hearing. Are we good? Okay, so I'll entertain a motion, unless someone wants to have it removed to discuss.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Gower, move to approve.
Thank you.
Commissioner Chvalichak, second.
Great, I have a first and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, motion carries. Next, we'll move along to business of the day, public hearing regional plan conformance review, City of Reno Master Plan, CR 18-003.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Commission, Chris Tolley, TMRPA for the record. The case before you is a conformance review for both the Stonegate Amendment to the City of Reno Master Plan and a project of regional significance. The project site is located generally northwest and southwest of the US 395 and White Lake Parkway intersection. So in this presentation, I will provide an overview of the amendment and PRS details, show the exhibit maps, and cover details of staff's analysis, and present the suggested motions. Here's an overview of the proposed amendment. The land use designation table on the screen shows the existing and proposed designations, including the sizes of each and percentage. In general, the proposal changes the land use designation on the property from primarily industrial to primarily residential. The table identifies the existing acreage on the left and the proposed on the right. And for example, you can note the Parks and Rec and open space designations do not currently exist on the property, but are proposed to be 485 acres. Continuing with the overview, these are the project of regional significant details. A project of regional significance is defined in state statute and the Truckee Meadows Regional Plan. The PRS thresholds are identified in the column on the left. The actual figures are presented on the right. Just to highlight a couple numbers, the proposed residential unit count is 5,000, and the employment figure is 2,257 jobs. And now onto the exhibit maps. Starting with the regional location map. This map places the project site within the context of the region, specifically showing the midpoint of the region. As you'll note, Stonegate is located in the upper left upper left portion of this map. And now moving on to the neighborhood map. So in addition to the maps provided in your staff report, we are showing two maps, this one and the next, using a larger scale to provide additional context for the immediate neighborhood. And a few notes while reviewing this map. The size is 1,737.9 acres. Project site is adjacent to US 395. And finally, abuts existing residential development north of the project site. And here is the neighborhood map aerial version, including imagery from 2016 showing again the subject property and the existing development to the north. The Stonegate phasing map and phasing table are shown on this slide and the next. They're also available for review in the staff report on page 4 or on page 10 of the packet. The developer has identified that the project is expected to be built out in 5 phases, not including the town center or neighborhood center. Different phases are identified on the map and also on the table on the next slide. The town center is located north of US 395, and the neighborhood center is located south of US 395, geographically in phase 3. As you can see, the phasing table shows that the residential component is expected to be built out in 5 phases. For example, under phase 1, there are a total of 880 units proposed. The non-residential land use occupy the bottom half of the table. Each category, such as the neighborhood center, is listed with the approximate size. Finally, the proposed 5,000 units and the approximately 1,737.9 acres result in an overall density of 2.87 dwelling units per acre. Next, we'll move on to the review criteria, or the criteria for the conformance review. Policy 4.1.3 of the regional plan identifies 6 factors that the RPC must consider and are shown on this slide. We will cover these also on the following slides, starting with regional form and pattern. The Truckee Meadows Service Area, or TMSA, is identified in the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan as area where growth is expected to occur over a 20-year horizon. Policy 1.2.2 identifies location priorities for managing regional growth, which include centers, TODs, transit-oriented development corridors, infill, and all other areas in the TMSA. Regional planning staff has identified that the Stonegate proposed development is located in priority area 6. Regional planning staff, So let's take a look at some of the existing entitlements near the project side to provide some additional content to what has already been approved in our region. Entitlements that have received a finding of conformance with the regional plan are shown in gold. These are also located in priority area 6. Purple are zoned for residential at various densities. The dark purple adjacent to Stonegate is Traintown, which has been approved by the city of Reno and may require a project of regional significance for housing units and potentially other factors. With this slide, we are trying to address what our housing needs are by the year 2036. The 2016 Washoe County Consensus Forecast estimates an overall population for the region at 548,159 residents by 2036. The last certified population estimate for Washoe County is 451,923 people. The estimated increase in population over this time frame is 96,236 people. So assuming 2.57 persons per household using the U.S. Census data for Washoe County, the estimated increase in population is expected to require an additional 37,445 residential units. Furthermore, factoring in a residential vacancy rate of approximately 5%, the number of additional units required is closer to 40,000 over this time frame. Next, we can take a look at the second set of numbers above. The first set is identifying the new residents moving to the region annually. The second is the number of new units needed annually. And finally, on average, Stonegate is estimated to provide approximately 250 units over a 20-year timeframe, which addresses approximately 12% of our housing needs during this time. Moving on to jobs and employment. So as noted previously, the estimated employment generated from Stonegate is 2,257 jobs. The job types include industrial and commercial. The commercial jobs are expected to be local serving, considering the permitted uses. On the right side, you can see the town center located north of 395, which shows the commercial uses in red and industrial uses in gray. Also, in the neighborhood center south of 395 is shown in Barbie pink. The majority of jobs are expected to be in these two areas. The balance of the project is primarily residential with parks and open space. So given the additional units and jobs in this project, we are showing that there are a variety of unit types and different densities. Housing type mixes include single-family and multifamily, and densities include 4,000 and 6,000 square foot lots, as would be for single-family residential. Finally, 200 affordable housing units are proposed in Phase 5 at 60% of the average median income. Continuing with jobs housing balance, given the Reno-Stead Airport is identified as a potential employment, is identified as new potential employment area in our evaluation, we reviewed the distance and drive times to the project versus the core of the region. The distance and drive times are provided on this slide as the second and third bullets. As you can see, the proposed development is closer to the Reno-Stead Airport than the core of the region. Taken together, these may both provide an opportunity for an increased jobs housing balance within the general area. Next, the next criteria is public services and infrastructure. Policy 3.5.1 requires that public facilities and services be available and adequate to serve the project. The proposed development is subject to the City of Reno's concurrency management system, which ensures adequate public facilities infrastructure will be available at the time impacts from new development occur. Reno's concurrency management system is also attachment 9 to your staff reports for reference. Within the infrastructure analysis, let's look more specifically at each component, starting with sanitary sewer. There is already existing sewer capacity to serve a portion of the project. However, additional treatment capacity improvements will be needed to serve the remaining portion. Sewer service will be provided through the existing Cold Springs Water Reclamation Facility operated by Washoe County. This will require a memorandum of understanding be outlined prior to the approval of the first special use permit or tentative map. And the MOU needs to be finalized before issuance of a building permit. All required on-site and off-site sanitary sewer improvements necessary to serve the project shall be completed and functional prior to the issuance of any certificate of occupancy. Let's look more specifically at water. The project will be served by the Truckee Meadows Water Authority, or TUMWA. It will require construction of an off-site water transmission main 6 miles in length. According to the PUD handbook, prior to the approval of each final map, the applicant shall demonstrate satisfaction of water purveyor requirements for issuance of a will-serve commitment or equivalent. The PUD handbook identifies that the master developer shall be responsible for obtaining all necessary approvals and construction of all necessary on- and off-site backbone water infrastructure prior to issuance of the first certificate of occupancy for each phase. And finally, any facility that must be constructed to serve the project will be required to meet TUMWA and Washoe County Health District standards. And now moving on to flood management. It has been identified that the proposed development will raise peak flows due to increased impervious surfaces. According to the PUD handbook, Stonegate shall construct adequate structures to detain and convey increased storm flows without increasing the elevation of White Lake. To accomplish this, additional flood storage within White Lake will be excavated and constructed during Phase 2. Prior to the issuance of each permit, the master developer shall have approved plans for the disposition of stormwaters generated on-site up to and including a 100-year frequency storm. The proposed PUD handbook identifies that the master developer shall be responsible for obtaining all necessary approvals and construction of all drainage and drainageway improvements. Next, moving on to police and fire. The Stonegate PUD handbook identifies that before the issuance of a certificate of occupancy for the 250th residence within the proposed development, the developer shall provide a residential station that will accommodate a 2-man public safety crew, police, fire, and emergency medical services. The construction of the 250th residence will occur in the first phase. Additionally, the developer will be required to develop a 2.5-acre site for a permanent fire station within Phase 1. The permanent station, also containing a police substation, will be required prior to a certificate of occupancy being issued for the 1,700th dwelling unit, which will occur in Phase 2. So with respect to traffic, in terms of transportation, Reno's concurrency management system requires that new development must be implemented and demonstrate compliance with local transportation system standards prior to the occupancy of each structure. For the regional road network, payment of regional road impact fees is required to demonstrate RTC concurrency. Finally, according to Reno's concurrency management system for freeways and the federal state road network, discretionary improvements may also be required to be constructed before occupancy. So this is the roadway improvements phasing table. Transportation capacity was a significant concern when the project was at the jurisdictional level. City of Reno and Stonegate worked to bring together various improvements to transportation and infrastructure needed for the project. The majority of them provide access to and from the site from US 395. And again, this is, overhead is the table showing the triggers for the necessary roadway improvements. And the first trigger is anticipated to occur in Phase 1. The developer has also agreed to time the proposed developments with the transportation capacity improvements to US 395 in order to address traffic concerns. The table on the slide provides a breakdown of the major timing pieces and required improvements or notices to proceed. Phase 1 or town center, whichever comes first, improvements include realignment of Clearacre southbound on-ramp between I-80 and McCarran. Phase 2 improvements include a new interchange at Lemon Drive. Phase 3 improvements include a notice to proceed for major capacity improvements to I-80, I-580 interchange. And finally, all noted improvements or notices to proceed are required before the first tentative map approval or multifamily building in each phase. Now moving on to Parks and Recreation. Reno's concurrency management system requires that the developer pay a residential construction tax that is used to fund park facilities. A variety of parks and recreation opportunities are outlined in the PUD handbook. There are designated parks in the town center and within phases 2 and 4. The largest of these is a community park shown in the image on the slide. This park is a minimum of 12 acres and timed to be constructed in Phase 2, and also must be completed prior to any application for development in Phase 3, of Phase 3. Also, a variety of trailheads and all parks and trails are open to the public. Common open space and associated improvements, including parks and trail corridors, will be phased with development, as determined during the location and review of each discretionary action. The parks designation will be approximately 50 acres. In addition, the open space designation, which is proposed to contain an extensive trail system, will be approximately 435 acres. In total, this is 485 acres, or 28% of the project site, compared to 0% of the current land uses. And next, moving on to schools. The PUD handbook states that Stonegate shall enter into an agreement with the Washoe County School District prior to the approval of the first parcel map or tentative map as applicable, to donate land for 2 elementary school sites within Stonegate. The location of each suitable site shall be mutually agreed upon by Stonegate and the Washoe County School District, and each shall contain approximately 9 acres. Additionally, Stonegate shall enter into a separate agreement with the Washoe County School District for the development of a high school site located north of US 395. This agreement shall outline the timing and development and size of the property to be purchased by the Washoe County School District. And finally, a safe route to school plan shall be submitted and approved by the Washoe County School District with the approval of each final map. Next, we'll move on to the fourth criteria, development constraints. In relation to this project, policy 2.1.1 of the regional plan requires local governments to address the management of steep slopes and playas. Dark green on the slide identifies areas with slopes over 30%, which are addressed in the City of Reno's master plan. The blue in the northern portion or section is DCA, Development Constraints Area for playa. Materials submitted by the City of Reno indicate that review of the development in relation to the DCA area for playa, or White Lake, has been conducted in compliance with the drainage guidelines for the City of Reno. This area of the PUD is identified as open space. And finally, the purple line identifies a regional utility corridor, and materials as submitted by the City of Reno indicate that the utility corridor is not proposed to be moved. And finally, covering the last 2 review criteria. There are no existing military installations within proximity to the site, and staff has not identified any cumulative or indirect effects in either the proposed amendment or project of regional significance. After reviewing the documentation that has been submitted by the City of Reno, regional planning staff concludes that the proposed amendment to the Reno Master Plan and the proposed project of regional significance conforms with the goals and policies of the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan. There are 2 proposed motions on the following slide that address the master plan amendment and project of regional significance. For approval, a master plan amendment requires a minimum of 6 votes, and a project of regional significance requires a majority of the quorum. Finally, any regional planning commission member voting against the motion should be prepared to specify what parts of the proposal does not conform with the regional plan. And finally, the suggested motions are listed on the slide. So this concludes staff's presentation. TMRPA, the City of Reno, and Washoe County staff are available for questions. Also, the developer's representative is also available.
Thank you. This is a public hearing, and I'm going to open the public hearing. Are there any requests to speak?
Tammy Holt still, and after that, Frank Shenny.
Thank you.
Tammy Holtstill, Lemon Valley Swan Lake Recovery Committee for the record. I am here not because it's a bad project, not because it's a good project. I am here stating, is this the right project at the right time when you don't have all the facts about closed basins? White's Lake is being injected in an aquifer with affluent water. That lake is in the same position as Swan Lake and Silver Lake. Swan Lake and Silver Lake are being injected with groundwater from Tumwa. None of these three lakes are evaporating or saturating into the ground. There's development around all three of them. There is a problem. And like I said, it's not a bad project. But is it the right project for the right time? There's a lot of things that are very iffy on the whole situation. And are they going to be around to finish this project in 25 to 30 years based upon what is going to happen with the traffic? Because it's keyed upon the traffic. So, and what NDOT does. So there's a lot of things to be looking at. I can't say that I don't like the project because I do like the project. I see what they've done. It's a nice project. But is it the right project at the right time in an area that you don't have all the facts on, that you don't have all the necessary information? They say that there's no impacts for this to happen. Well, look at our lakes. There's an impact right now. All of the North Valleys have an impact happening at this moment. What happens if we have another big year? I know that White's Lake, even though I didn't take a picture, it's close to breaching and going on the road on the northwest side. And there's older homes, which are, of course, again, county, so unincorporated. Washoe County commissioners are saying, well, what about the purple pipe? We're not paying for the purple pipe. Who's paying for the purple pipe? For using the effluent water to water trees and plants. Well, you don't do that during the wintertime. When's your biggest water time? During the wintertime. So you're gonna have affluent water going into White's Lake. You're gonna have stormwater runoff going into White's Lake, and you can't get rid of it because it's wintertime. That's why we have a problem with Swan Lake. So these are things that you need to look at. Is it safe for a community to be in the position of taking on something that big when there's this kind of issue? Another thing to look at, the high school. Oh, well.
Thank you.
And now we have Frank Shenny. Hopefully I got your last name right.
Yep. See, look at my papers here. Yeah, I've lived in Cold Springs probably 20 years, and it's sad I didn't see any report about, White Lake, about the possibly flooding. We're in a closed basin. It's so close to being like Swan Lake right now, and that water is just not going down. But one of the other concerns I have is the high school. I know, that Stonegate has donated land, but from what I understand, that land is right there along White Lake. And it's not a very good land. It's right in a flood area. So I talked to one of the trustees with the school board about that land. I showed him a picture, and he told me there's no way the school would approve that. And I believe the one night when the Washoe County school representative was at the meeting and said he would do it, the reason why he said it is that because they're very desperate for land. There's no land. We'll take anything we can get. Well, I don't think that's good enough. You look at Wild Creek right now. That's 2 years behind. There's a lawsuit. There's going to be a couple more years before there's going to be a high school there. And it's desperate. We can't keep just building trailers for schools. I understand, they said about there's going to build a police station and a fire station, but are they going to be manned? As far as I understand, they're going to use the existing police officer from Stead to patrol the area. And also, when the first phase when it starts with Stonegate as far as fire, I understand that they're going to have maybe sprinklers instead of on the first phase and not have a manned fire station. And supposedly when it does happen at being manned, they're going to have 2 firefighters, if the funding even comes for that. And I think that there should be at least 3 firefighters in that police station and a fire station. As for 395, is there really going to be funding for that? You know, I understand impact fees going towards 395, but I worry that that money might not be guaranteed. If there's a flood or something in the Reno area, that money could be easily diverted. So I think there really needs to be guaranteed funds for that, for 395. And also want to see lanes coming, you know, not just southbound, but also coming northbound. Let's see. And also, according to NRS, that there's supposed to be police, a manned police, when the project starts, and fire, according to NRS. And I think that needs to be guaranteed when the project starts, not sprinkler starting in the beginning phase. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other requests to speak?
I have none further at this time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to close the public hearing, and I bring it back to the commission. Commissioner Weisky,
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I start with questions, please?
you sure can.
Chris? As you stated in your presentation, we have 6 findings, basically, that we have to agree that staff has done a thorough job of investigating and researching and coming to terms with. And so my first question is, does staff agree that this PUD, this project, meets the master plan goals and policies of the Regional Planning Association?
Yes, by virtue of our recommendation, yes.
Okay. At the City of Reno, we heard a lot about sewer discussions. We had a lot of sewer discussions. Not literally, but in the sewer treatment plant discussions. We had a lot of discussions. We also had stormwater discussions. We had discussions of drinkable water being provided by Tumwa. Does staff feel that there are adequate protections put in place to protect and keep this project from going forward if certain goals are not met, or if certain agencies do not have capacity or flows to meet the goals of the Regional Planning Agency?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, that there is essentially a backstop.
Correct.
Okay. That the proposal has a backstop, and we've outlined fairly clearly the backstops throughout, as they apply to the regional plan throughout our evaluation and this presentation. So yes, they've been adequately covered, as is satisfactory to the Public Services and Infrastructure section.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Chair, at this time, I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners have any questions? Okay, Commissioner Chivalchek.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair, and for staff. In terms of, as you went through your presentation, I jotted down some questions, and then I'll have questions regarding my assessment of conformance in the 6 subsections. When you, let me get to when you say that existing sewer capacity is already there, how much capacity is currently there for example, for Phase 1?
We'll bring up City of Reno staff to answer.
Good evening, Heather Manzo, Assistant Planner for the Record with the City of Reno. To answer your question, Chair, or Commissioner Shavilicek, with regard to sewer facilities, there are no existing infrastructure in place at this time. The project is going to be served by the Cold Springs Water Reclamation or Wastewater Reclamation Facility about 4 miles to the north of the project site, and the applicant prior to any permits or requests for development would need to extend those services to the subject site. And as far as capacity of that plant, it is maintained by Washoe County, and I do believe there's a Washoe County representative that could address that for you.
So if we could have that representative.
We have Washoe County, okay.
Good evening, for the record, Dwayne Smith, Director of Engineering for Washoe County. Excuse me. Had a couple of cups of coffee, and this happens every time. Currently, let me take a quick look. I wanted to get the right numbers. Washoe County completed facility planning work in the Cold Springs area in 2016. At that time, we identified potential new developments to flow into our facility. Those developments did include the Stonegate development. Our permit currently at the plant is 700,000 gallons per day for treatment capacity. Right now, we're flowing between 350 and 400,000 gallons per day. I mentioned the facility planning work because that's critical for any of our areas as we're experiencing growth, that our responsibility is to get out in front of development and make sure that there is sufficient treatment capacity within the facilities. So coupled with the existing capacity, we also have to recognize that there's other developments in the area that will sewer ultimately to Washoe County's facility. So we have to couple that demand, the current existing demand for the existing customers, and we also have to look into the future for any future customers that may come our way. So we have set forward, based on the facility plan, based on those factors, a plan for expansion phases at the treatment plant. All treatment plants have to go through this cycle. You do not build a treatment facility to full capacity initially. The costs are too expensive, you don't have connection fees to pay for it, and the maintenance costs would not be acceptable. So they're always done in a phased approach. So all treatment capacity at the Washoe County facility at Cold Springs will be done in a phased process and out in front of to make sure that we have sufficient treatment capacity. On the flip side, you have water that comes out of the backside of the plant. Just for clarification, that treated effluent that we currently produce is not injected into the ground in the Cold Springs area. We have a series of what are called rapid infiltration basins, RIBs. That is where our current treated effluent is discharged. In those rapid infiltration basins, both water seeps into the ground, goes through the process of basically purifying that water before it reaches the groundwater table. Then you also have evaporation and evapotranspiration, which occurs, so a significant portion of that water escapes vertically into the atmosphere. As our facility increases in demand, as demands increase and our facility increases in size, yes, we are looking very closely, and we also have a lot of new opportunities for how we treat treated effluent as a very precious resource for our communities moving forward. There are significant pilot programs in place now at other facilities in the region. We have coupled with the Water Innovation Campus at UNR to help us understand what opportunities do exist, what science needs to go into those treatment plans, and we're working very closely regionally with our other partners, the City of Reno, City of Sparks, and Tumwa, as we look forward to how we deal and how we utilize this very precious resource moving forward. So I just want to give you that comment as well regarding the effluent as it comes out of the back of the plant.
Thank you. And I wanted, before you go on, because there are so many, I want to compartmentalize, so before you jump to another section, I just want to ask the other commissioners if any other commissioners have any questions regarding sewer. Commissioner Chesney?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Chesney, I want some sort of guarantee, or hear some sort of guarantee that the costs for the incremental expansion of the sewer plant are not going to spill over to the rest of the residents of Washoe County. That in fact, the developers, this developer, any future developers, bear 100% of the impact. And I'm going to have to need to hear that.
Okay, so who would you like to direct the question to?
I guess Dwayne could answer that, or the applicant,
Okay,
either one.
Again, for the record, Dwayne Smith, Director of Engineering and Capital Projects for Washoe County. That's a very good question, Commissioner. I appreciate you bringing that up. Washoe County, as with the other jurisdictions, has a standing policy that all new development pays for development. Connection fees, those fees associated with the improvements for infrastructure within the treatment facility, will be paid by any developer that comes into the area and sewers to our facility. Those connection fees are based again on those facility plans. As we move forward, we couple those projects together, determine what those overall costs are. We typically cash finance a portion and debt finance a larger portion of those facilities and use those connection fees to pay both that cash and that debt servicing component. Also of note is the on-site facilities, and in this case, some of the significant off-site facilities to convey those sewer flows to our facility. Those will all be built and paid for by the developer. No existing customer base will pay for those facilities.
Great, thank you very much.
thank you. Okay. Next topic.
If I may continue then,
Yes, you
Madam
sure
Chair.
can.
Police and fire, and I guess this is probably for the applicant, or when initially it says a two-person crew in phase one, but in terms of agreements with unions and such, two-person crews cannot start suppression until other services arrive.
So would you like the applicant?
Yes, I'd like someone to.
Okay.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Regional Planning Commission. For the record, Sienna Reed, Senior Planner. We do have our fire department staff with us here tonight, but I think before letting them kind of get into the details of union contracts, I did want to note that fire facilities are set up in the handbook so that they're provided at different stages of development. And so we really have kind of a temporary residential station, and as regional staff noted, that would come online at the 250th unit. We then have the permanent fire station that would come online at the 1700th dwelling unit. And all of those numbers really are linked back to the regional standards of cover and different densities set forth in that document in terms of when you need to step up from, say, a rural level of coverage to a suburban level of coverage to an urban level of coverage. So wanted to provide a little bit more context there in terms of how those thresholds were developed and how they were integrated into the handbook so that we do have those facilities in place for staff to man. And I'll go ahead and let our fire staff give you a little bit more detail on the other question you had.
Great, thank you. And for the record, Trey Palmer, Fire Marshal for the City of Reno Fire Department. To answer your question a little bit, maybe to clarify, at the 250th house, to build the residential fire station is to cover, well, I'll back up here. The standards of cover basically dictate our response time of when we're to provide service to a development or a house. Currently, our goal is to arrive at every house under 6 minutes. In a suburban area, it's under 8 minutes. This development currently is well outside those parameters of acceptable response time. And so there's two risks that we have to mitigate. The first one is medical response. The second one is fire response. So in the event of a medical emergency, we need to be able to get medics to a person within that timeline. And that's what the two-person medical crew is there for at the 250th house. Part of the agreement with this development is that they have to put fire sprinklers into the buildings until they hit 1700. And that is to mitigate the fire response. That's to buy time for us to get to a house, to put the fire out, and to mitigate that fire risk. Whereas the two-person medical crew is to mitigate the medical response risk. And currently, we do have a union agreement to staff a medical response unit. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sure. So, and this might be directed at you or might be directed at staff. What happens between residence 1 and 249? Currently, there is not a mutual aid agreement between City of Reno and Truckee Meadows, and the closest station is a Truckee Meadows station.
So currently in this area, we do have a mutual aid agreement with Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District. We actually have an automatic aid agreement with Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District. So currently in this area, if we do have any kind of emergency, Truckee Meadows Fire Protection District will automatically respond at this time. However, we cannot depend on that.
If I may,
Yeah,
since we have the chief from Truckee Meadows, could I get affirmation on that,
Absolutely.
please?
Chief?
For the record, Charlie Moore, Fire Chief for Truckee Meadows Fire. That automatic aid agreement has not been, let's say, programmed into CAD yet. In theory, we do that throughout the area. There are some exceptions where Reno does not call us as first due, particularly in South Reno. But generally, in most cases, mutual aid will be automatic. Problem is in the dispatch process. That dispatch process can take anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes for the call to be transferred from Reno to Washoe County or vice versa. So there's a huge delay in the way the calls are processed. What it will take, though, is some discussions with Reno on how we would be deployed there, because it's not set up currently, although there's, I think, an implied mutual aid agreement, but again, it's not consistent across all areas of the city.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Did-
And if I may to help clarify a little bit again, Trey Palmer, Fire Marshal, the Reno Fire Department. To kind of answer your question, just moving forward, I will tell you that because this is happening so far into the future, we cannot craft our response with the assumption that another fire agency will get there first. And so that's why we're going at house number 250. We're requiring the sprinkler, but until then, there will be somewhat of a void.
But my question was from house residence 1 to residence 249, so I think you just answered that there will be a void.
There could be a void, correct?
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Is that your complete questions for fire?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Gower, do you have questions for fire?
No, Commissioner Chesney
Or
wants to weigh in
Commissioner
too.
Chesney?
Commissioner Chesney, are you telling me that the first 250 homes that are going to be built are going to be sprinkled?
Commissioner
what you're
Chesney,
telling
who
me?
do you want to address?
The fire marshal.
Thank you.
That is correct. Those 250 homes would have to be sprinklered.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could ask a question of TMRPA staff first, because I want to understand this in terms of how regional planning staff evaluates this from a policy perspective first. So we have in our policy 4.1.3, and that's part of the 6 findings that we have to make for a project of regional significance, right? One of those, the 4th one, relates to timing and phasing of infrastructure and the fiscal analysis of service provision. So taking into account what staff has heard, potential presence or not presence of a mutual aid agreement between the 2 jurisdictions, number 1. How does that weigh into your determination and your ability to meet that finding?
Ms. Robinson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe we're describing, you said policy 4.1.3, and you specifically identified number 4. Is that correct? So the compatibility of the proposed plan with existing and planned public service areas, policies and priorities, availability, timing, and phasing of infrastructure, and fiscal analysis of service provision is the item that you're requesting. In terms of the analysis that TMRPA does, when the Reno Master Plan, or Sparks, or Washoe County, when the master plans come in, we do a conformance review on those master plans. And the expectation is that the facilities plans and the master plans for the jurisdictions will actually have this handled. In this particular case, we're relying on the concurrency management system from the city of Reno, which was found in conformance with the regional plan. I believe the last time it came in was probably at the 2012 update.
Okay, so to follow up on that, then if you're basing your analysis and your determination and your ability to meet that finding on an analysis of conformance that you did on a plan however long ago, a year ago, and we've got a project of regional significance that's coming in the door with 5,000 housing units, it is proposing a change to the infrastructure requirements for the city of Reno that may or may not have been captured in that plan. So how do we account for that as a new PRS coming in the door? How does staff evaluate it for a project-specific question? Because that's the criteria that we're using. We're using these 6 policies. We're not evaluating the City of Reno Master Plan. We're evaluating the project of regional significance, which is being proposed to us tonight.
That is correct. I want to go back and make sure that I understand the question, though. I got a little confused, and I apologize for that, on the conversation around we have a new project coming in, and what are we comparing that to? Is that, and I think that's why I'm asking, because I think I got confused.
So City of Reno has concurrency requirements. I understand that. We dealt with that at the City of Reno when this came through. The regional plan in policy 3.5 has concurrency requirements.
Correct.
For infrastructure provision. There's 2 parts of infrastructure. There's the infrastructure in the sense of infrastructure and services. There's 2 parts to that. There's the physical presence of the infrastructure itself, a firehouse, a police station, fire trucks, police cars, things like that. That's the first part of it. The second part of being able to provide those type of services is the staff.
Correct.
So how does regional planning staff evaluate and able to make that finding based on the information that was provided for this specific project? And what is your confidence level that the City of Reno or Truckee Meadows Fire, through a mutual aid agreement, can provide the staffing and the services to staff that infrastructure to protect the 5,000 residents or the people who are living in those 5,000 homes? That's the question that I want answered, and I want to know how staff made that finding.
And I appreciate the rephrase. I understand better. Thank you. In terms of how we found conformance with that and how we've applied our policies previously, we have really applied these policies since the adoption in 2007. of this, the current plan structure as public facilities and infrastructure. The conversation around services has not historically been part of the evaluation of this process. I will be frank and say that this is something we are evaluating in the regional plan update currently. But we have 11 years of history where we've looked at public facilities and infrastructure strictly from that kind of physical perspective and not the service perspective. And I think that's something that needs to have conversation here at the Regional Planning Commission. Certainly, we have a workshop next week to talk about the regional plan update. I suspect that this is going to come up then.
So just to close the loop then and conclude my question, if I could, Madam Chair.
Of course.
So in that finding, the last phrase is fiscal analysis of the service provision. So regional planning staff made that finding based on a precedent that, due to the presence of the infrastructure that's proposed in the handbook, fire station, fire trucks at certain points in the phasing, that's how you base that finding, not on the ability of the city of Reno to fund the staffing to fulfill the services.
That is correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Again, for the record, Santa Reed, Senior Planner with the City of Reno. Just to provide a little bit more detail in relation to concurrency management, how this particular request was analyzed through the City of Reno's process. Chair Gower correctly notes that, as jurisdictions move forward in approving development, that there are different components to providing services. There's definitely that very physical infrastructure component, and then there's the component of staffing. In the city's master plan under which this particular request was reviewed, what we have are concurrency requirements, and those really set forward what are all of those different infrastructure components that a developer is responsible for putting in to serve development, and then what the concurrency management system does in concert with our public services facilities and infrastructure plan is set forth, well, what are those level of service standards that need to be evaluated as development proceeds forward? So those are set forth, and the City of Reno's master plan also contains policies that guide the review of those service levels, really saying what is going to be the impact that new development has. And the guidance there from the master plan, and this project was actually reviewed when our previous master plan was in place, so that's the plan that we're using, say that we need to look to maintain or potentially increase service levels. And so that's something that was definitely a conversation moving through the Planning Commission, through the City Council hearings on this particular topic, especially around the fact that this is, in terms of the project area, this has been within the City of Reno for some time. It was annexed in the early 2000s, so the City of Reno has been responsible for service provision for many years at this point. That being said, it's a master plan land use change, an establishment of a planned unit development, and an associated handbook. So all of those things need to be looked at again in terms of the impact of that type of development. And so certainly those conversations occurred. There was an acknowledgement that it is on the developer to put in those physical infrastructure components. And so that's where you really get all of those different thresholds coming in on what are those police facilities and what are their triggers, what are the fire facilities and what are their triggers. But it does come down to the City of Reno funding staff to man those stations. And so that's something that was analyzed. We did have a fiscal impact analysis that was submitted with this particular request. It came in a little bit late. It came into City Council, so there was really quite a bit more kind of deep work done there, and I believe that that was submitted with the request for conformance review. And ultimately, the City Council did approve the request, noting that police and fire staffing would need to be provided at the time that development occurs, and that would be in the future. We don't have building permits that are being pulled today. So those discussions did occur, and I just wanted to provide a little bit more context in terms of those discussions. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer those as well.
Commissioner Gower.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to say I appreciate the clarification on the policy side. And since the Planning Commission wasn't privy to some of those conversations necessarily that happened at City Council regarding the funding piece, because that's a little bit outside of our jurisdiction on the Planning Commission, if I could just follow up with Fire Marshal about that piece, if I could.
Again, for the record, Trey Palmer, Fire Marshal, Reno Fire Department.
Thank you. And my question is, so two parts. The first part of it is let's say at build out, when the station is in place and the vehicles are in place, so under that 1700th residence, what is the cost to the city, the annual cost to the city to fund that station?
You know, I'm gonna have to check on that, because we'd have to look at, I'll have to check on that. Let me do some texting and I'll get back to you. Is that okay? Okay.
And just to weigh in a little bit more, for the record, Sienna Reed, we did have estimates of approximately $2 million, I believe, per station per year annually for staffing. When we did the master plan work, we did, through our master plan update process, a deep dive into fiscal analysis of service provision, and that was the estimate that we had at that particular time, but it potentially could have changed.
And I concur, that is approximately right, 2 million.
And if I could,
Of course.
does the city of Reno understand it's a ways out? It's, something that's not concrete. What is the status of the city of Reno's funding for fire services? And if you program this in, is it reasonable to assume that the funding will be available to provide services for that station?
So what you're asking is for me to look into a crystal ball and look at the fiscal ability of the city and the other governing agencies at that time. I can tell you the intent is yes, to staff it. Can we guarantee it? I cannot.
I mean, what does that mean?
So when we staff stations, yes, the intent is to staff the station there with a 4-person engine crew. But again, we've been through ups and downs in the past. And so on a daily basis, we brown out stations depending on staffing in various areas and amount of calls. And so, yes, it is our goal to staff every station every day. But sometimes depending on budgets, personnel, and potentially, again, the fiscal ability at the time, we have to make day-to-day decisions, and it is possible that the station could be browned out. If you were to ask me if we had full 5,000 residents in place at the time, yes, the probability is pretty high that we'd have a fully staffed station. But again, in 5 to 10 years, I can't necessarily predict what the fiscal ability of the city is going to be at that point.
Madam Chair, if I could.
Of course.
Yeah.
So if at some point down the road, when the station is built, the vehicles are in place, potentially staffing has been in place, but City of Reno funding, you're unable to fund the staffing for that station, which we've seen happen. We saw it happen in Somerset. We saw it happen on Skyline.
That is correct.
Brownout of the stations. What is the backup plan if that station is browned out? Do we have to rely on a mutual aid agreement with Truckee Meadows Fire? And if that's not in place, where's the nearest City of Reno fire station that provides those services for those 5,000 homes?
So generally, we would rearrange staffing to the closest stations. In that particular area, the closest Reno fire station would be Station 9, which is in the Stead area, off of Stead Boulevard by the airport there. To answer the question on mutual aid, automatic aid, it depends on what's happening at that point. Again, we can't guarantee that we would have a mutual aid or automatic aid agreement in place at the time. It's a possibility, but again, there's also a possibility it would not be in place. We can't plan for an agreement until we have the agreement in place.
One more?
What, last one?
Go right ahead.
Sorry, before we leave that subject, Heather Manzo, Assistant Planner with the
course.
City of Reno. I wanted to provide a little bit more clarification to that. I know we think of the Stonegate Fire Station as being the new station, and so it's not really on our radar today. But if that station were to be manned and the city were to face financial situations such as we have in the past, it may be that when the city is reevaluating priorities, that is the station that would stay open based on those priorities that are found. And it may be that another station would need to have reduced resources. There are a couple of fire stations within that area. There's the Stead Station, as our fire representative has mentioned, and there's also another fire station on North Virginia Street. It is possible that the Stead and the North Virginia stations currently have a little bit of overlap, and so it's entirely possible that when we look at a situation in the future, should it arise, that the Stonegate Station remain open to serve the residents to that furthest northwest portion of the city. I wanted to clarify that, and also that it's not so much that we wouldn't serve the site, it's that the response times may need to be adjusted to properly to respond to those areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Still want it?
Last
Okay, go
question,
right
I
ahead.
promise.
Okay, on this subject.
On this subject.
Okay.
On police and fire, yes.
And so I'm looking at right now policy 3.6.1 in the regional plan, which relates to provides a priority order for facilities and services in the region. And priority number 1 is downtown centers. Priority number 6 is all other areas. So this project, as I understand it, falls within priority area number 6, all other areas. So as it relates to fire and all other services and infrastructure, quite frankly, isn't the purpose of that policy to encourage development in areas where we already have the infrastructure and services in place to support additional development and provide redundancy in circumstances when things like brownouts or understaffing might occur? It provides buffering for fiscal deficiencies. It provides buffering for unforeseen circumstances. Isn't that the purpose?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
This is definitely an item that has been identified in our conversations, again, regarding what is working well in the regional plan as it currently exists. So there's a couple things going on. One is kind of the size of the Truckee Meadows service areas, and the other is what this kind of these priority pieces look like, and how to be able to implement that policy well. And so part of the conversation we've been having with the Public Staff Working Group, I know we've chatted a little bit about it here at the Planning Commission, we've chatted about this with the Governing Board, and we're continuing those conversations, is if, and I think you're right about this, if the conversation is we develop in close proximity to existing infrastructure and we improve based on that proximity to existing infrastructure. So we maximize the investment that we do have in the ground and the investments that we put into the ground, then there probably has to be a conversation around how that gets applied here effectively. This is, again, another conversation around how this has been applied for 11 years and how this is something that can be improved in our process.
So I appreciate that. And just a fundamental question to end for Fire Marshal Palmer, is there, am I right to assume that there's more redundancy, more opportunities for the City of Reno Fire, in your case, to sort of shift services around in downtown areas and regional centers versus all other areas, in this case in Cold Springs?
again, for the record, Trey Palmer, Fire Marshal, Reno Fire Department, correct. Your assumption is correct. In the downtown area, we have stations located at closer proximities, usually within a 5-minute response time from every area. In a suburban area such as this, it would be, our secondary response time would be substantially more if that particular engine was busy.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I appreciate the latitude for the questions.
Of course. Do any other commissioners have any more fire questions?
Commissioner
Commissioner
Chesney,
Chesney?
who actually, when we get to the 1,700 residents, who actually pays for the physical construction of the police and the fire station? The city of Reno or the
Who would you like
developer?
to ask? Would you like to ask?
Whoever
Okay.
wants to field it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Manzo, Assistant Planner with the City of Reno. In the handbook, the developer, and also through the fire agreement that the City Council has reviewed and potentially approved, should this development come back to them for recordation of the handbook, the developer is responsible to construct that fire station, as well as providing the necessary apparatus, the vehicles, and the furniture, fixtures, and equipment to fill the station.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so we're good with fire questions. So back to Commissioner Chivilicek.
Thank you. As I go through, okay, so my next question, it relates to schools. So I guess this would start with staff. When you say who determines the minimum acreages for schools? You say 9 acres for an elementary school, but is there a set standard about minimum acreage to build a school?
So my understanding, Madam Chair, excuse me, if I may. My understanding around this in terms of that kind of minimum acreage piece, I'll be honest and say I'm not entirely sure. I'm happy to figure that out. What I do know is, and it looks like Heather's got an even better answer than I do, that those sites were negotiated with the school district on the expectation that that would be enough for those facilities. But Heather?
Thank you, Heather Manzo, Assistant Planner with the City of Reno. Those minimum acreages do come from the Washoe County School District, and so 9 acres is identified as their minimum size for an elementary school. And as you have noted in the PUD handbook, there are 4 potential elementary school sites, and those, the 2 sites that would be identified would come through that agreement between Washoe County and the developer.
So when you cite a high school and then there was no mention of a middle school, and Cold Springs Middle School is almost at capacity. And there was no reference to a middle school, and North Valley's high school is, I believe, over capacity, or very near over capacity. So what is the minimum acreages for those schools? Because when the first PUD that I looked at, probably about a year ago now, seemed to be deficient in total acreages required for schools.
The acreages do come from Washoe County School District. With regard to the middle school, the school district, when they provided comments to the City of Reno, did not identify a middle school site as a need within the Stonegate development area. And with regard to the high school site, I know 80 acres has been identified based on the location, but that high school site, the school district is actually exploring multiple options within the North Valleys. There definitely is a need for an additional high school to serve the North Valleys community. Where that's going to be located ultimately is going to be up to Washoe County School District. The applicant and the school district, or excuse me, the developer and the school district have been in discussions and negotiations on a site that's in that town center area that's about 80 acres in size.
Okay, I think this might tie back into Commissioner Gower's comment and question in terms of what I would refer to as, unintended consequences is that this development, because of its size, is triggering these, because of the potential for its size. And we'll discuss other things later, but so that's where my concern is that how do we, it's this balancing act, or it's a chicken or an egg kind of thing, but it's troubling to me that we already have a snapshot of what the existing conditions of schools are in the North Valleys. And this will only exacerbate. So in terms of, and it feels like it's being punted, well, that's up to the school district, or that's up to this entity, or that's up to this entity. It would seem prudent that we should be able to get that answer as a collective group.
Sure, and to address your concerns regarding that, with regard to the impact of this development on the school district has identified that this development at build-out would definitely require, that the impact of this development on schools is that it would need 2 elementary schools to serve this community, the Stonegate residents. In addition, as we discussed before, the North Valleys is going to need another high school, probably sooner rather than later, whether they identify a site off of the Stonegate property or whether they work in negotiation with Stonegate to acquire the property in the town center is yet to be determined. But there will be a high school site that will need to come online to serve the residents of Stonegate. And so with each tentative map or multifamily request, any residential request, we do seek advice on current school capacity, plans for future schools, and things of that nature from the school district. And they do provide on each case-by-case basis what their needs are at that time. So if there is not sufficient capacity to serve the members of the tentative map that's being proposed or the multifamily development that's proposed, those solutions do need to be addressed before that project could be approved.
Thank you.
Okay, does any other commissioners have questions about schools? Commissioner Gower?
Madam Chair, I promise not as many questions as
Okay,
about fire.
well, that's quite all right.
Heather, again, since I know we talked about this project a lot at the Reno Planning Commission, but again, not being privy to the discussions at City Council related to fiscal impacts. I know we're talking about Washoe County School District, not City of Reno, but were there discussions about differences in fiscal impacts on the district of schools in this location versus schools in more of a centralized location? And where I'm going with this is I'm trying to understand if there's a difference in costs to the district, things like, distribution of repair services for buses and things like that for schools in Cold Springs versus schools in regional centers and corridors.
That's not something that we discussed at the city's level, that those planning procedures and fiscal impacts to the school district are really taken care of by the Washoe County School District itself. It was noted through the location of the potential elementary school sites that those sites will be identified to best serve the population of Stonegate. And so that's why we have a couple of different options all through the phases, is to provide for, where possible, savings in transportation, both for residents as well as for school bus service. So I know the school district does take that into their planning analysis of proposals, but as far as what that fiscal impact would be to the school district, I don't have that information.
Fair enough, thank you. Madam Chair, can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course you can.
Regional staff?
Yes.
Chris, when you did your conformance review of the project of regional significance, and again, back to that one finding, number 4, I believe it was, under policy 4.15, I believe it was, is something like that part of your, the information that comes in when you're making that finding related to schools?
Go ahead.
We included, just to speak about the staff report, we included, this isn't 100% getting at your question, we included the section to address schools because that was a part of the development proposal that seemed relevant to bring in to provide full context. But we don't, I believe, address schools.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
In terms of, just as it happens at the City of Reno, that kind of fiscal impact perspective on the school district itself is something that the school district deals with, and we do not get additional information around that in terms of the conformance review, if that is your question.
That was my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, any other commissioners have any questions about schools? Okay, Commissioner Chivilicek?
I have nothing further in the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any other questions on any of the other areas? Commissioner Gower? I'll just let you have the mic the rest of the night.
Sorry.
Oh,
No,
don't worry, it's quite all right.
I appreciate the other commissioners being patient with me on this. Chris, again, if I could ask you a question. In your conformance review checklist, there were a couple things. Policy 1.2.13 related to infill development was not checked as applying. Why does that not apply?
Give me a second while I actually take.
So policy 1.2.13, for the record, Nate Kusha, Team RVA, requires local government master plans to include infill development incentives. That's specifically towards a master plan requirement, not for a project-specific use.
Okay. Is that the same for 2.6, which is related to air quality, which is not included in the checklist?
I believe so. I have to check.
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Yes, the answer to your question, Commissioner Gower, is yes, it is the same.
Okay, so I understand with 2.6 why it's not included, because it's requiring the health district to do something. But the strategy under 2.6.1 to reduce the rate of increase in vehicle miles traveled is one of the strategies that they have to use to meet conformance with the regional plan. So how can the regional plan achieve its goals and policies if it's approving development that would increase vehicle miles traveled?
Madam Chair, if I may?
Yes.
So as I'm reading the policy, and let's make sure we're at the same spot. So
Okay.
policy 2.6.1, to be found in conformance with the regional plan, the air quality plans and ordinances of the Washoe County Health District shall include, and then there are 4 sub-items underneath that.
Right.
Is that what we're discussing?
Right, particularly number 1.
Particularly number 1, strategies to reduce the rate of increase in vehicle miles traveled per capita. The air quality plans and ordinances of the health district is what we're discussing in this particular policy,
Correct.
right? So in terms of applying that to a project, I guess what I see is we're required to review the air quality plans and ordinances of the health district, and they're found in conformance of this.
So, sorry, Madam
No,
Chair,
go
if I
right
could.
ahead.
So, with all due respect, I understand that, and I understand the process of the agency to evaluate those plans for conformance, but it seems like it's creating a double standard. On one side, we're saying Washoe County Air Quality or Health District, we're encouraging you or requiring you as part of your plan to be in conformance with the regional plan to develop strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, on one hand. On the other hand, we're saying when we evaluate a project of regional significance for a significant increase in residential units and commercial development at the edge of the TMSA that's going to significantly increase vehicle miles traveled, if we do that, then it creates a double standard, in my opinion. And how does staff reconcile that, and why is it not included as part of the conformance review?
My perspective on, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes.
I don't think my mic is working, but Jessica Prenti for the record. I would just like to remind the commission that the review of the project of regional significance is confined to the adopted plan as it is written now. And broadly construing the policies to encompass other types of review of policies that would not fit into the actual project-based review that's going on right now would be on the outside lines of what statutes allow you to do at this time. So I would just need to give you a legal reminder to stay within the actual adopted policies as they're written.
So let me ask, can I ask a follow-up question on that then? For item number 6 under 4.13 that asked about cumulative impacts, does staff consider air quality impacts from VMT a cumulative impact? And is that within the policy and the decision-making framework that we have?
That is not within the decision framework that we have right now. And to be frank, part of the issue has been that technology has actually changed on our ability to be able to review that over the past 11 years since this was adopted. So this is, I feel, another instance of there are various places that this plan could be improved. I think we've all talked about that, probably everybody in this room at some point. And I think you're doing a good job of pointing some of those out in this conversation.
So what does staff identify as a cumulative or indirect impact? And how did you make that conformance determination for this project of regional significance and master plan amendment?
What we have found in terms of cumulative impacts, and let me back up and say, from a historical perspective, there was not a lot of evaluation done on cumulative impacts. As part of our our request for proposal on the regional plan update, we put in a piece on cumulative impacts because this is something that we've been struggling to be able to implement well ourselves. And what does that mean? And part of what we got in our response was how incredibly difficult this is to be able to do as a in terms of cumulative impacts, and what does that mean? Again, this is something that we are working on with Echo Northwest and Mike McKeever to develop how to be able to implement this well. There are implementation issues with what we're talking about right now. And so we are looking for a better, cleaner path around that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. So there are no further questions or comments. I would entertain a motion. Commissioner Weisky.
Madam Chair, I move to find the Stonegate Amendment to the Reno Master Plan in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Gower?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will not be voting in favor of the motion, and as requested during the presentation that Chris gave, I'm going to identify some policies that I am looking at, and I don't see how the master plan amendment or the project of regional significance can be in conformance with them, in particular based on the feedback that we received regarding fire and a little bit on schools related to concurrency. That's goal 3.5, policy 3.6.1, which is infrastructure priority, relates a little bit to policy 2.1.1, which identifies wildland urban interface. It's my understanding that this project would be on the urban interface. Based on the feedback from fire, I'm not comfortable that the city of Reno can provide the services to meet that master plan requirement for the urban interface. And quite frankly, the policy 4.1.3 for a project of regional significance identifies fiscal analysis of service provision. I don't feel that the project is in conformance with that. It identifies infill development, frankly, all of the policies in the master plan and everything that the regional planning agency has been doing related to housing, studies related to infrastructure, related to industrial land supply analysis that's driven by the policies in the regional plan. It just totally deviates from the location and the timing of this proposal. And then finally, the cumulative and indirect effects. I asked that question because I wanted to know the answer of how staff evaluated that, particularly regarding air quality impacts as it relates to vehicle miles traveled, the wildland-urban interface, and the potential for a strain on services not only for the city of Reno, but for Washoe County related to water, wastewater, police, and fire.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner
Chesney.
Chesney, I agree with Commissioner Gower, and I can not support the approval of this development.
So you're going to state for the same reasons that Commissioner
Same
Gower
reasons
did?
as Commissioner Gower.
Okay.
yes.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Chivilicek.
Thank you. I too will be not supporting the motion, and to add to what Commissioner Gower added in item 3, compatibility in terms of housing balance, affordability of housing, and then regional when we get into affordable housing in terms of there isn't currently a transit available to commute people. The other area that causes me the biggest concern is the issues, the mutual aid, automatic aid, the uncertainty of what those two agreements, those two jurisdictions have, as well as issues with response times and dispatch. So that's what I would add to Commissioner Gower's comments.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commissioners? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll do roll call. Roll call vote.
Diane Vanderwell,
Yay.
Peter Gower,
No.
James Barnes,
Yes.
Larry Chesney,
No.
Sarah Chivilicek,
No.
James Hewens,
Yes.
Ed Hawkins,
Yes.
Frank Peterson,
Yes.
and Kevin Weisky.
Yes.
Motion carries. Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Madam Chair, that was for both of them?
No, that was only
No,
for one.
that was
I only
only for
made a
one.
motion for the first one.
Right.
Madam Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion for the
Commissioner
second.
Weisky.
Thank you. I move to find the Stonegate project of regional significance in conformance with the 2012 Truckee Meadows Regional Plan based on the findings listed in the staff report.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a first and a second. I will. Any discussion? Okay, we'll do another roll call vote, please. Yay.
Peter Gower,
No.
James Barnes,
Yes.
Larry Chesney,
No.
Sarah Chivilicek,
No.
James Hewens, Ed Hawkins,
Yes.
Frank Peterson,
Yes.
Kevin Weisky.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Next, we'll move along to reports.
Madam Chair, if I may, under item 8A, the next meeting for the Regional Planning Commission is on June 13th, so that is a week from today, and that will be at the RTC building at 1105 Terminal Way on the first floor conference room. And again, that is a workshop on the regional plan update at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, move along to legal counsel.
Jessica Prenti, for the record, nothing to report, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next, request for future agenda items. I think from some of the discussion that we've had, that Commissioner Gower has brought up, I think, would you like to, well, and Commissioner Chivilicek also, would you like to see some future agenda items around some of the things that we had very deep discussion about?
Madam Chair, I'll respond
right
to
ahead.
that. Frankly, I think a lot of the discussions are ongoing as part of the regional plan update. And I think that's probably why Commissioner Weisky was so
Yes.
adamant that he indicated the 2012
Correct.
regional plan and not the regional plan that's being developed. So other than potentially, something regarding cumulative impact, since that is one of the specific findings, is one of the 6 that we have to make for a PRS, I really don't think that anything else is outside of the scope of the update.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And to add to that, in terms of maybe a deeper dive into the TMSA, because right now it treats everything as equal, and that's very troubling. And I'll just echo, the cumulative effects are, really need to be addressed.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. When you have public comment, do we have anybody?
I have none at this time.
Thank you. Do we have any written correspondence?
Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay, thank you. I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you.
You didn't think I had.